On this episode, we're going to be talking about something extremely delicate and even more important, and that is protecting our kids from the harmful effects of pornography. This will actually be broken out into two episodes. On today's episode, part one, we'll talk about pornography and ways to arm our kids against it. On part two's episode, which will air in 2 weeks, we'll talk about ways to arm parents and provide a framework to protect our children effectively. I'm here today with Kristen Jenson, founder of Protect Young Minds and best-selling author of Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, Porn Proofing Today's Young Kids, and Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Jr., a simple plan to protect young minds. She also serves on the Prevention Task Force of the National Coalition on Sexual Exploitation. Hi, Kristen. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Tyrolyn. It's so good to be here with you.
Well, it's so good to have you. I actually heard you on another podcast, and you were talking about your book and ways to porn-proof our kids, and I immediately went out and bought your books. My husband and I, we read your book to our children. I recommended your books to my mom friends, and I'm hoping they're listening today, as well as other parents.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm so glad and happy that they've been helpful to your family.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this topic is such a sensitive topic. And like even before I heard you on the podcast, it was not one that I really was thinking about like delving into with my kids. Like it wasn't like at the top of my mind, like, oh, this is something we should talk about with our kids. Like literally, it wasn't until like I heard you talking about how important it was. And I think there's probably a lot of parents with that mindset that they're thinking, oh, yeah, we have plenty of time to talk to our kids about porn. But I know your philosophy is as long as a child is on the internet and they're playing games and they have access to the internet, we should talk to them early about this subject. Is that true?
Right, because, for example, when your 2-year-old starts to run around and be able to open the door and get outside, you teach them about, safety. Don't run into the street. Always hold hands with, mom or dad or a grown-up. We teach them safety rules all the time because there are some dangers in their environment, but we don't think to teach them about the dangers, the digital dangers. And yet, children from a very young age are getting on, digital platforms and getting on screens. And so they deserve to be warned so they won't be caught off guard. And they'll know what to do if they see something inappropriate.
I agree. So let's just start from the beginning as far as what sparked your advocacy for this subject. I know it was something very tragic that your friend actually experienced, and I believe this sparked your passion to protect young minds. Can you just kind of talk about your story and how you got involved with this subject in the first place?
Yeah, sure. Well, I definitely didn't plan to do this. Wasn't in my life goals at the time, but just like you didn't quite think about, talking to your kids at this point, something sparked my interest, and that was a mom she had a big family. She called me one night and told me about this devastating thing that had happened, which is her oldest son. They found out he was sexually molesting his younger brothers and sisters, from the 14-year-old all the way down to the 4-year-old. And at the time, yeah, he was 17 years old, and pornography was a part of it. So I woke up the next morning, and we had talked till late in the night, and I was just still so shocked by all of this and the devastation that it wreaked on their family. He had to be prosecuted. Kids had to be in counseling. So I woke up and I just had this thought keep coming to my mind, who will warn the young children and, who's going to help them? And so I started looking for resources because I'm one of those people that believe like there's a book for everything.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I'm sure there's like, a dozen books on this already. I'll just go on Amazon or wherever and I'll look. And I could not find anything. And the more research I did, the more I realized there's nothing. There are books and books and books about stranger danger or even child abuse, prevention. but for kids, to read to kids. But there was nothing out there that I could find uh, that warned a child about pornography. And I can understand it's a tricky subject and nobody wants to go there with their kids, obviously. But I realized that if this child had been impacted by pornography, um, obviously many other kids were getting into it, being sexualized in a very toxic way, and then that led to a lot of other problems. I recently actually talked with this young man, and he's in his 20s now. He's married, and he still has a problem with porn.
Hmm.
He is no longer feels like he's has any problem with offending on children, but he definitely is still being impacted. So so important that we reach our children early and talk to them and warn them and help them understand, why they need to avoid this material and how to do it. So that's all led to writing Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. I thought it was going to take a couple weeks in the summer, but it ended up taking 3 years to
Wow.
write it and to publish it. And but I tested on so many parents, so many different iterations of versions, so that it flowed and it gave just the right amount of information. And basically, the book just shows a mother and a father. It portrays them talking and having these conversations with their children, especially this one child in the book. And so it serves as a script, and parents can read the book to their child. They can, read the book to themselves and then just use it as a guide, however you feel comfortable. But it's very easy and comfortable. Those are the two comments I keep getting all the time. It's
I agree. Yeah.
really comfortable. Yeah.
Hmm.
So how did it go with your kids? I mean, when you read it to your kids, were they freaked out, or did they
Well,
accept it, or how did that
yeah,
go?
I think I was more freaked out at the beginning. Like when it came in the mail, I was like, okay, I don't know what to expect. But when I opened it, I was like, you know what, it's not like a comic book style, but it's very visual. With the pictures, not as far as inappropriate visual.
No, I know. I've been
Yeah.
asked that, Sarah. Like, are there any bad pictures in this book? I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness, no, no bad pictures.
Yeah, but I think because you start off explaining, what is porn, and then like each chapter is so simple, and then at the end of each chapter, there's questions that we can go over. It made it very easy for me and my husband to just go through this information with them, and then we were able to ask questions like, "Oh, have you ever seen anything like this?" And the reason why I brought it up to my mom friends is because their kids are friends with my kids. So if their kids see something, I don't want them to go to my child saying, "Oh, look what I saw." I want them to go to their parents. So I want them to be armed as well, just like my kids. Like I think it's so important that other kids are armed when they do see something because, as you mentioned, seeing something inappropriate can raise the curiosity. It can keep piquing that curiosity until, eventually it can turn into some sort of problem. So I think the way that you wrote it, just so simply and beautifully and just easy to understand, like chapter by chapter, like you don't have to do the whole book in one day. Like literally we just do a chapter per day and we just kind of delve into like the meaning of that chapter and the questions that you have at the end.
Yeah,
So
that's a
yeah,
great way to do it. That's awesome, because then you are more able to make sure your child understands everything.
right.
And that's awesome. The one thing I wanted to say is that kids, they're very curious, and but you don't need to actually, if you haven't started the sex talks with them, you can still read this book to them. There's nothing in there about sex, actually.
Mm-hmm. So before you even delve more into that, can you just explain the difference between the two books that you have and also the age ranges so they know, what to expect?
Yeah, sure. So, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, Porn Proofing Today's Young Kids was the first book I wrote, and it was for 7 to 11 or 12-year-olds. And then I got asked, and that book goes into more of the kind of the brain science, and that's what kids love. They love to learn that they have two brains, a feeling brain and a thinking brain, and how they work together, and which one needs to be in charge in order to keep them safe. Um, and then I got asked by parents, and I remember I was at a speaking event, and a mom came up to me, and she said, "Are you ever going to write a book for preschoolers?" And it felt like someone had like punched me in the gut. And I'm like, because I'd been getting like raised eyebrows, like, 7? You're going to talk to a 7-year-old about this?
Right.
And, but more and more I saw that kids were on devices at early age, 2 and 3 years old. And then I also just started hearing so many stories of 5-year-olds being, exposed to pornography on a school bus, or a 3-year-old that got into pornography on YouTube or whatever. So so I realized, oh yeah, there is definitely a need. And so that's when I wrote Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior. And it's a great, like, just a simple way, gentle way to start introducing the topic without, your child isn't going to lose their innocence or anything, but they're going to be stronger and safer when you start early.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
hashtag sooner is safer, right?
Yes, exactly. Now, I'm going to ask the question. So you have these 2 wonderful books for this age range. What about for tweens and teens?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I'm sure there's parents that haven't started
Yes.
yet and they're wanting some sort of guidance.
Yeah. So if you have tweens and teens, you haven't started yet, this is what I would do. I would get Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, Porn Proofing Today's Young Kids. I'd go through it. I'd highlight parts. I would just use it as a guideline to have these talks, because I've had so many parents tell me they've done this with their teens, because the information is really valid for no matter what your age. And I've even had therapists have their adult clients read this book because it's super simple, and it's so helpful in helping them understand how their brain is impacted by pornography, and how they can use their brain, their thinking part of their brain, to overcome it. So that's what I would do. And then I am working on a tween book. It's in my head.
Yay.
It's coming. And I keep getting more and more little pieces, like, okay, I could do this, I could do that. But it's going to be a very different book than the other 2, because it's really going to be geared for a tween or a teen, in the sense that it'll probably be, more visual, like a comic book, graphic novel, whatever.
Yeah.
Something they would actually want to read, and have a storyline and some characters. So I'm really thinking about this, and eventually I'll have it. But in the meantime, I definitely encourage moms and dads to use what I have right now, because those principles will be in the tween book. Plus, we'll probably go into a little bit more of, how pornography is related to sex trafficking, and, that kind of thing. Because older kids, they're aware of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And tweens and teens are very interested in fairness and justice. And I believe that's a good way to approach it. Like, is this fair? Is this fair to all these people that are being used? Because there are studies that show that 45 to 50% of women that are prostituted are also filmed without their consent, filmed for pornography.
Mm.
So, all sexual exploitation is linked.
Yes, right.
It's all one big, they're just different manifestations of it. Porn is just, it's just one manifestation of it, but it's certainly a big one out there. And unfortunately, no one will ever come out and say, "Oh, sex trafficking is just the best thing,"
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
We should do more of it. No, nobody's going to say that, but they'll say porn is fine, it's healthy, it's good, blah, blah, blah. And they won't see that there's so much connection between the two. So I'll bring that out in the teen and the tween book, but there's lots of that information on protectyoungminds.org as well.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I think that we have a lot of good information for parents of tweens on our website, and yeah, they could just
Yes.
go ahead and use the book that I have, and if they get on our mailing list, as soon as we have that other book, we'll let them know.
Yeah. So yeah, you have a lot of great information on protectyoungminds.org, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so, and then just as far as this topic, I mean, there's really so many layers and depths to this subject. So there may be some parents that are listening who they have a child who maybe they've caught them dabbling into porn. Maybe they've caught them like sneaking around with it, but they don't really know how to address that with them. Like, what do you suggest, like from the beginning? Let's say they've caught their 11-year-old looking at pictures or videos that they shouldn't, or they noticed on their iPad the history
Yeah.
that they're looking at porn. Like
Yeah.
immediately, like what would you recommend to that parent who's like stumped? They don't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, some parents are stumped, but some parents are freaked out, right?
Yes,
It just
yes.
depends. So we have a guide on Protect Your Minds under our Help and Healing page called the Smart Plan Guide for Proactive Parents. So I think that is a wonderful place to start because we really help you understand the steps and the stages to go through to deal with this. But I would say the first thing is stay calm, and that is deal with your own emotions first before you deal with your child's.
That's good.
And then, uh, make a plan. So talk to somebody. If you're a single parent, talk to a friend or relative. If you're married, talk to your spouse. Talk to somebody and figure out. You don't have to jump on this right away. Because
Mm-hmm.
if they've been looking, they've been looking. But you've got it. It's much better to step back, get yourself organized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and then go in rather than just have a knee-jerk reaction. But even if you have a knee-jerk reaction, you can recover from that. But then I would say, educating the child. And we just published a wonderful and some kids are going to totally get it. They're going to say, I didn't even like what I saw. I just was curious. I just was curious about what other, you know, like what girls look like at age 12, which is, if
Yeah.
I've heard of boys like looking for 12-year-old naked girls. That's
Hmm.
called child porn. So they could get into trouble if they actually find any of it and download it. And
Yeah.
then the parent is going to be responsible for that.
Hmm.
So just a word, but they're curious. They don't realize they innocently often get into this. So we have this wonderful article about especially helping kids that don't want help and all about the relationship. So throughout all of this, educating your child, I think the main thing is not to shame them, to understand they're just curious or maybe even submitting to peer pressure, and to educate them about pornography and what it can do to their brain. And then also the other side of pornography is sex, right? I mean, sex is a counterfeit. It's a toxic counterfeit of what sex can be. Pornography is sex negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to be sex positive, you really need to teach your children early on, the purpose of sex, and that sex is not a performance. Sex is something you do with someone you love and trust and are committed to, and it's to bring you closer. It's to strengthen that relationship. I mean, that at least that's what I believe, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what the studies show too. So if we can teach children from an early on, not just the mechanics of sex, but the purposes,
Mm-hmm.
and how it's so wonderful at the right place in the right time with the right person, in the right circumstance, but that, if it's just done casually, um, and or with pornography makes sex just a performance. That's all.
Yeah.
It's a performance, and it objectifies
Yeah.
people.
And then
right?
talking about sex, like what would you recommend as far as talking to kids about sex?
So it has to be earlier than, than when I grew up,
Yeah,
uh, because there's so many sexual cues out there.
there's so many.
Yeah, and
There's so many.
yeah, and their kids are being sexualized. I've heard of like little boys, 5, and girls too, but like early, that see something on TV or on a movie that their parents are watching that's very sexual, but maybe as a parent we've kind of become very, insensitive to the impact. And so I talked to a man one time who said when he was 5, he watched a video with his parents, a movie, and it had some sexual parts in it. Now, his parents probably didn't think anything of it, but for him, he says, it affected me. Like I felt something when I saw that.
Mm.
And that led him to look for more of that material and to develop an addiction to pornography. And I can't tell you how many stories of that is just like a basic of I've heard so many stories that start just that way and just that way. I was little. One guy we interviewed said I would get the catalogs, like Victoria's Secret or other catalogs that had underwear ads. And he says I would cut them out and I would hide them under my Thomas the Train set.
Hmm.
And I would look at them. And, we could say, oh, that's just innocent. But it led him to see women mostly as just something, as objects to kind of get him excited, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that, of course, led as he got older into a pornography addiction. So it's so important that we talk to our kids young and start in stages. We have an article on Protect Young Minds that's it's called Let's Talk About Sex, and it's 8 books that we've curated and that we recommend for helping parents start those conversations. But again, go beyond the mechanics. Make sure you talk about the love.
Yeah, definitely. And then just going a little deeper on this subject, kids and pornography. There are kids that have been addicted to pornography. I know you've studied this. So what have you seen? Like as young as how old have you seen a porn addiction?
Well, I've heard of children as young as 7 and 8 getting professional counseling because they couldn't stop looking at pornography. I have talked to men who have coaching businesses who coach men, who are constantly contacted by young kids who say, I can't stop looking at this. Can you help me? And, he says, you need to talk to your parents. And he says, they'll hang up. He says, I can't talk to my parents. Well, because we haven't talked to them first, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I just got an email the other day, I think yesterday, uh, from a pastor who said, I have a mom in my congregation, single mom, whose 9 and 12-year-old are both addicted to pornography. What can we, do you have any resources?
Wow.
Uh, I mean, this is a silent epidemic. It is everywhere the internet goes,
Yeah.
and so many parents do not know. I know a man who told me about how he was shown pornography by his older cousins um, when he was 7, and he says, and it was just like magazines, right? You
Yeah.
know, and he said, but once he says that just turned something on, and he says, I just felt like this compulsion to look for more. And from that day on, he just looked for more, and he had started a porn addiction. And to this day, his mother never knows about it. His mother doesn't know about it. It can
Much.
be hidden. It can be hidden. Let's just
Yeah.
say that. If your kid is addicted to meth, if your kid is addicted to cigarettes or alcohol, not as easy to hide, right? There's
Right.
evidence, lots of it. Uh, porn addiction is a little bit easier to hide, although there definitely are some signs.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's also important to talk about statistically when kids are exposed to pornography. Isn't it like 40-50% of them are might be more prone to molest other kids? Like, what is that statistic? I think that's
So
important to talk about.
yeah. So I I don't know of a study. Well, I know of studies, actually a meta study that shows that boys that look at pornography um, have much higher rates of sexual aggression, meaning rape, right? Much
Mm-hmm.
higher rates of sexual aggression. And that's like a meta study, meaning there's like 22 studies they put together. So you can really trust that, yes, pornography is definitely a factor when it comes to rape and sexual aggression. Now, as far as children offending against children, this is something that is now coming to light. I was at a symposium last March, and it was in Washington, D.C., about this very topic, child on child harmful sexual behavior. The military is having a terrible time with this on their bases. So many people were there from the military. I presented, and we helped host this with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. So in this country, what I've read and seen is 40%. I believe it's higher. Okay, but this is the last statistic that I know of. 40% of children who are abused by other children. In the UK, their report is more like 65%. And there's a group of sexual assault nurse examiners in Kansas who did a study at their hospital. And they found out when they looked at the perpetrators on these kids, the largest demographic was young boys ages 11 to 15, was the largest demographic in their study. And they noted that a lot of these assaults were not your typical kind of normal sexual exploration. It was, definitely specific acts that are common on, in pornography.
Hmm.
So they could see that, pornography definitely was fueling child on child harmful sexual behavior. Um, I could tell you a couple stories. One story was a mom who contacted me, and she was watching kids over the summer, her kids plus a couple of other neighbor kids. The mom was a single mom, and the 10-year-old boy, they hadn't had any problem for the first month. The kids played really nicely together. And then her 7-year-old daughter came to her and said, this 10-year-old boy had gotten her in the bathroom and, was doing sexual things and wanted her to do sexual things with him. So the mother of the 7-year-old called the mother of the 10-year-old boy and told her what happened. And this boy's mother broke down and said, 3 weeks ago, I found porn on the iPad, and I just don't know what to do about it. And so, uh, you know, it looks like at least that this boy had been watching pornography, and then 3 weeks later acted out, found a way to act out on a younger, more vulnerable child. And I have also been to a conference on this specific, um, another conference. Oh, don't I have fun, Carolyn?
You're the expert.
Isn't my life so great?
I know, but you're like the expert on this subject. Like people need
Oh
you. They need your
gosh.
resources.
Well, it's a major driver, and the experts know it's a major driver. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, porn, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it is a major driver. And I've talked to police officers, I've talked to parole officers, and they all say, I've never met, and I've talked to psychologists who actually go into prisons and counsel sex offenders, and they say, I've never met a sex offender that wasn't totally into porn.
Okay, so my question, Kristen, because the studies have proven that pornography is very harmful in so many ways. Like you've seen this
Totally.
with serial killers, porn is usually at the root of it, and so many other areas. Like, why is this still even legal? I know it's a money thing, it's a big business, but how is it that people don't see the harmful effects of pornography and more people aren't doing something about this?
That is a very good question. And I could only say that the the people that are very pro porn, that are making money from pornography, from enslaving people with addiction, they're making money. It's like the tobacco companies. They didn't want to admit that nicotine was addicting. And so they're making lots of money and they have a lot of influence. And when you have a lot of money and influence, you can purchase power and political power and so on. So it is harmful, and there is a movement. There are at least 14 or 15 states that have passed resolutions naming, saying that pornography is a public health crisis. And I believe that will only grow as the evidence continues to mount. Now, with tobacco, it took 7,000 studies before the government finally said, "Oh, okay, well, I guess this really is bad."
Yeah.
But if you waited for that, you probably would have already died from lung cancer.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is we can't wait for the government to finally come out and say porn is bad or porn is bad for kids. We have to protect our kids, by inoculating them, by giving them an internal filter before that happens. If we wait, it's just going to be too late. So I think that, I'm very hopeful that eventually, and this information is getting out more and more. But let me tell you, it's a war out there. And there are people that are trying very, very hard to protect the money that they're making.
For more on Kristen Jenson, please visit protectyoungminds.org and be sure to come back in 2 weeks when we air part 2 of our conversation on porn-proofing our kids. Thanks for listening to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. If you liked what you heard today, please be so kind and rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time.